maybe this one individual that's broken his chains says, that's not a cow. You know, that's not a cow. I've thought through this, and this is not truth. You know, I've thought through it, and I have decided that diving under your desk in a schoolroom is probably not going to save you from an atomic weapon. You know, I could never quite conceive this, or maybe the truth has changed over time. Like at one time, everyone had to have fallout shelters so that you could survive 7 years until the earth was, you know, you could live in the earth again. 7 years might not do it, and I'm not certain that the mutations that would happen would be worth it. But maybe what I'm giving you right now is distorted truth, and you'd have to reason it out by thinking and researching. So this is what Socrates is saying. So there might be one person, or perhaps more, that will break their chains in the cave. They will look at the shadow on the wall and perceive that maybe that shadow is not what it's being represented as. And they may want to try to tell the other people in the cave. So the other people look at the shadow, and after this one person is broken free from the chains, and they'll say, no, that's a cow. They're still looking at the shadow on the wall, as you can see here, and they'll say, no, that's a cow. Now, I'm giving you my words for Socrates' explanation. You'll have to look at Plato's Allegory of the Cave, Book 7, but I'm trying to give you an allegory to explain an allegory, and I hope that you understand that. I've taken other representations for this. Then there might be this one individual that's tired of talking to the chained people in the cave, and he is not willing, or she is not willing, to accept the distorted truth, and they want to find a way out of the cave. And if you look around, and remember, if this person has been chained all of this time and has not been able to move your head or your neck or your arms, imagine that you've been chained to the concepts of a society, and you have been able to break your chains. And when you start looking around for the first time, thinking for yourself, the first time you try thinking for yourself and moving your head, it might be very painful. And everyone that is still chained are going to keep saying, there's something wrong with you. You're a sick person. They're saying, get back in your chains and stay here. This is comfortable, it's safe. You don't really have to think. They don't, society doesn't want us to think. But maybe this person, when they look around, they're going to see this steep path out of this cave. And one of our students several years ago from Coburn drew this picture, and instead of a steep inclined path with rocks on it, as Socrates presents in Plato's Allegory of the Cave, this young lady drew a ladder that you're going to have to climb out of this cave. But don't expect, when you are climbing out of the ideas of your society, or when you're learning, let's say it this way, when you are learning to think for yourself, don't expect all of society to applaud you and say, well, that's just wonderful. Let's look at another representation of this concept, and this is the way it's presented in one of the college manuals for philosophy. You can see that here's the way Plato's Allegory of the Cave is presented. There are people that are chained. They're staring at the cave wall. They cannot break themselves free. There are institutions in each government that have a concept that they want to present. So they have a fire, of course, here in the back of the cave. And then they will present concepts. And here's the concept presented. There's a fire here. So a shadow of this tree will be reflected on the wall. But that's not the true tree. The tree is here. And you know what shadows look like. They are very distorted, and they look different than the truth. So this is the way one college philosophy manual shows this. But imagine that someone finally breaks free from these chains and is able to climb past all of this and to the outside. And as we said yesterday, the first time that you see sunlight, the first time that you see truth about anything, you know, have you ever just been almost hit in the face by truth that you thought, you know, this was very good, or you thought something like this, that you thought that life was very good, or that an individual was very good, and then you found out the truth, and it just sort of, it hurts almost when you realize the truth. And this is what Socrates is saying in Plato's Allegory of the Cave. So you finally are able to come out of the cave. You cannot look directly at truth at the very beginning. It is too painful. So what you will do is you will look at the reflections of the good or truth in, perhaps as it's reflected in water. You can't look at all of truth at one time. If you knew all of the truth about everything at one time, it would be too much for you. So you look at reflections of the truth in water, and then maybe later on you will be able to look at reflections of the truth as it's reflected maybe on tree leaves. Again, this is an allegory. You know, you will just look at truth as it reflects in different situations in life. And then perhaps finally you will be able to look totally at the good or truth. And to Plato, the good and truth are pretty much synonymous, so you can see that concept. Now this is an allegory saying that you must battle to look at truth, to know what is true, what is good. You will have to battle. Now what is truth? Well, people are still struggling with that. Does truth change from society to society? Well, I don't think Socrates would suggest that, or Plato. All right, so there might be an individual that struggles out of the cave, but it's not going to be easy. And if you try to go back and help the people that are still in the cave, they'll think you're crazy. They'll tell you to climb back in your chains. But this individual is struggling to find truth, or the good, as Plato tells you. And it is, you will be separate. You will not be part of your society if you do this. And usually these individuals are destroyed, much as Socrates was. But he's looking for the truth. When you find truth, you cannot look directly at it. You'll have to see it reflected in different areas in your life. Maybe in school, or maybe truth, you will see it reflected in perhaps one individual's writing or philosophy, but you cannot look directly at the truth until you reach a higher understanding, because it will destroy you. So first of all, you'll look at truth as it is reflected on maybe the leaves of trees, which would be symbolic of looking in pieces of literature. And finally, this truth, this great knowledge, will enlighten you, and you will be able to look directly at truth, or the good. So that's the point that you're trying to come to, so that you can struggle out of your cave. But you cannot do this without thinking. You must be able to think. And a thinking man is probably the most dangerous thing in the world. You know, most things in society do not demand that you think. Perhaps most things in society demand that you simply take over the body of whatever is being presented. You know, that body of philosophy or that body of literature. But they do not demand, most of the time they don't want you to think, because a thinking individual is very dangerous. Now, have many people in literature, many writers, have they espoused Plato's and Socrates' earlier ideas? Well, you find them in the most unusual places. As saying, we've found comic books that had these ideas because these people were enlightened people. You will also find them in cartoons. You'll also find them in commercials, because someone obviously has a sense of humor. You're going to find these. Now, in the 11th grade, last year, you may have read something by Melville. You may have read Moby Dick. And you're going to find in Moby Dick that this concept of the cave is presented. And in fact, let's go ahead. I have it on the visual stage. Not on the visual stage, but on a slide. But I will tell you, I typed this in about 2 seconds, and Erica will attest to that because I had a computer problem this morning. But let's see if it is correct. And let's go ahead and look at this. Of course, it is from the novel Moby Dick, and this is what Melville is saying. All visible objects are but as pasteboard mask. So everything that you're seeing is distorted. All visible objects are but as pasteboard mask. But if you have the ability to strike through these shadows on the wall, is what Melville is saying. It's just these pasteboard things, these distorted visions that you see. But if a man will strike through the mask, if you can just get to that point where you can see through the illusion, see through the shadow that's presented, how can the prisoner reach outside except by thrusting through the wall? Now that is a direct correlation to the allegory of the cave. I had not realized that, but Mr. Gentry from Appalachia, who's our facilitator there, was talking to me on the phone a couple of days ago, and he says, do you remember those lines from Moby Dick? And this is in the section called the quarter deck, if you'd like to find it. And I had not remembered it, but at least he had remembered it, and he did fax me those pages, and I do appreciate it, Mr. Gentry. But that certainly draws a parallel straight back to the allegory of the cave, and I'm certain that Melville had studied this. And it also draws a parallel to, the fact that we're going to have to think through this, that we're going to have to have this task set before us. Now, if you're willing to stay chained, then, stay chained, whatever concepts, whatever ideas are presented. Please, that's what, why you're chained in the first place. Don't think. Please don't think. But if you can, thrust through the wall, as Melville suggests, then you will find the truth, or good, as Plato has suggested. Now this is sort of a difficult thing to do, but we've looked at the still point philosophy, and now we're looking at the allegory of the cave, and we're going to see how this applies to pieces of literature.